Good evening, everyone, and welcome to a special edition of Up North Live Unscripted at 6:30. I'm Maya Engel, joined by Allie Baxter, and tonight we are hosting a Your Voice, Your Future virtual town hall. So it's on the impact of seasonal and vacation rentals on affordable housing across northern Michigan. So we have put together a panel that's working to figure out a balance between rentals and the need for more housing across northern Michigan. So the virtual town hall is going to be on ABC 29 and 8 until 7 o'clock, and then it'll be on our digital platform. So you can watch on Facebook, YouTube, and X until 7:30. So once we get to 7 o'clock, we're going to unfortunately have to say goodbye to our ABC viewers. But you folks watching on ABC, just head to our Facebook, YouTube, or X page, and you can watch the second half hour. So be sure to leave any questions or comments you have for our panelists too in the live comments. You can also send an email to our newsroom. I'll keep an eye on our email. But if you are watching on Facebook, YouTube, or X, there is a way to leave a live comment. So we will introduce our panelists here in a little bit. But just to give you a little background information on why this is the topic for our virtual town hall. So this is a follow-up story to a special report that you worked on and shared with us last month, Allie. Do you want to share a little more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So last month we did this longer story that we aired about affordable housing and the impact that vacation rentals may have on that. We are no strangers to doing stories on affordable housing here. And this was just an area that we hadn't explored in depth before. Do vacation rentals, which are also referred to as seasonal rentals, short-term rentals, do they have an impact on our housing stock here? And do they even have an impact on our affordable housing stock? So that story aired 2 weeks ago, and we do want to go ahead and play it for you guys again, just as a refresher of what we talked about. It's a conversation almost every community in northern Michigan is having right now. Does something need to be done about short-term, vacation, or seasonal rentals?
They certainly have an impact on our year-round housing stock.
That's because Northwest Michigan has 26% of the state's vacation rentals.
I think we're making great progress. I think there's still a long way to go.
Every community's progress looks a little different than others. If you ask them, it's all about
balance.
Some look to their northern Michigan neighbors to see how they're handling vacation rentals.
People liked the Frankfurt framework.
We just saw our neighborhoods disappearing.
Josh Mills is the City of Frankfurt superintendent. He says during the pandemic, the city noticed what once were affordable properties were being gobbled up by cash offers.
It puts us in a quandary because major economy that we have here is tourist driven.
We have our most beautiful place in America. I am proud to announce it is Sleeping Bear Dunes.
Everyone remembers when Good Morning America said we were the most beautiful place. That's had an impact on us. It's had a positive impact on us, and I think it's had a negative impact on us.
Mills understood there needed to be an incentive to encourage property owners to support families living in the area year-round, so Frankfurt implemented a tax break for them.
Our voices were heard in Lansing.
If northern Michigan is a region of tourism, Traverse City is understood to be the epicenter of it.
It's nice for people to have options because they have different needs and things like that, but yes, we do have a housing problem.
Planning Director Sean Winter and his team have been working for the last few years on the city's master plan. Neighborhood feedback sessions confirm
frustration that we heard. We have these large multifamily buildings that in the winter months are just dark. They're empty, they're not occupied, while people are struggling to find housing. And a lot of that is just so that they can be operated as short-term rentals. And it is true that some of those properties do go up for lease, but it's hard to lease a place from October to May when you need a place year-round. So it doesn't really help solve people's problems.
The city's goal is to keep short-term rentals out of neighborhoods and only in commercial zone districts. But there's different types of commercial zoning, and only C1 and 2 have a 25% cap for short-term rentals. No cap on C3 and 4 properties means there's nothing stopping buildings from being completely made up of vacation rentals. And it's already happened.
The apartments are called Trailside 45. They're being
Trailside 45 was marketed as an affordable housing option, but the building, which is in a commercial district with no limits, was sold in 2021, and its new owners flipped from rentals to condos. According to the city's website, there's 51 out of 74 units approved to operate as a vacation rental at Trailside 45.
If we had had in that district a cap for the percent of units, it may have kept a lot of those those dwelling units online as long-term rentals.
While most communities are balancing their short-term rentals, in Charlevoix, Chamber Director Sarah Van Horn says it's seasonal homes that hurt their housing stock more.
Halloween, just a little bit ago, you're hard-pressed to find a street that has multiple houses ready to give out candy because a lot of them are dark. So you think of just those little community things and those special days for people that are hard to provide when you have such a seasonal environment.
Van Horn says this isn't a new conversation. She has meeting minutes from 2002 talking about a housing crisis. Are there any conversations that they were having in 2002 that are the same conversations that we're having now in 2024?
Yes, a lot of the same conversations have been happening, which can be frustrating.
So Van Horn says she encourages people to reframe the conversation and put things in perspective.
You worry about a traffic problem, and there might be increased traffic on a street if new housing goes there, but then if it doesn't go there, you might have increased traffic by having to drive an extra 45 minutes to find a hospital that can serve you.
Because it's about thinking bigger than your own property.
I want to go back to that type of community. Maybe that's a little corny, maybe that's a little wishful thinking, but there's a lot to be said about having a stable community.
In northern Michigan, Allie Baxter, UpNorthLive News.
And you got a little sneak peek of some of the panelists in Allie's story. So again, we will hear from them after our first commercial break. But right now, we do want to show our question of the day. It is related to this entire topic, and we highly encourage you to vote in our question of the day. Leave any comments and questions in the comment section below. So do you think vacation rentals have a positive or negative impact on affordable housing in your community? You can see the live results. As of right now, 85% say negative and 15% say positive. So this is also something that our panelists can see right now. They are seeing these live results as well, and we will touch base with them on their reaction to these live results a little later. And we will pull this up again throughout the show. But for now, let's take our first commercial break, and then we'll be back in just a few minutes, and we will introduce all of our panelists and really get into the meat and bones of this town hall. Welcome back, everyone, to our Your Voice, Your Future virtual town hall. Let's introduce our panelists, shall we, Allie?
That's right, Maya. Let's go ahead and start with Sean Winter. He is the City of Traverse City's Planning Director. We're bringing them in one at a time here. And next we have Josh Mills. He is the City of Frankfurt Superintendent. And then we also have Yarrow Brown here with us as well. She's the Executive Director at Housing North. So guys, thank you so much for joining us, and not just for joining us tonight, but also sharing your valuable information with me just a few months ago as well, as we talked about some of these housing issues.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
So do you guys want to start just by telling us exactly who you are and what you do? We can start with Sean.
Yeah, hi. Again, my name is Sean Winter. I'm the planning director here in the city of Traverse City. I've been here for about 4 years now. I live in the city with my wonderful wife and our daughter. I'm also someone who grew up in this area, so I've had the opportunity to watch this community change and evolve over 40 plus years. And one thing is certain is that the change never stops. This community, like all communities, is always evolving, sometimes at faster paces than others. But that is the one certainty that people like Josh and Yarrow and myself can count on, is that change will be coming.
Absolutely. Josh, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Joshua Mills. I was hired as a city superintendent in 2000. And in addition to those duties, being that we're a small community, I am involved in everything associated with building communities. So I'm also the zoning administrator. I'm the planner for the community. I'm the DDA director. But for us as a community, you know, our sustainable housing needs has really been a primary focus for me since I took on the job, because I was born and raised in this community. And like Sean, I saw so many changes occur over the last 40, close to 50 years, that as a community, we needed to do a better job at creating opportunities associated with housing. And of course, short-term rentals has been a part of our community for many years. And trying to, again, find that balance has been a mission for us for over 20 years.
And Yarrow, tell us a little bit about what you do.
Thank you. So I'm the executive director of Housing North, and we cover the 10 counties in Northwest Michigan. And we also cover Grand Traverse County. So from Manistee over to Wexford, Missaukee, and up to the Bridge. And we work with our communities to help remove barriers to housing and help create housing solutions through communications, policy, and advocacy, and capacity building.
Well, thank you guys all so much for being here tonight for our virtual town hall. Let's get right into some questions. Allie, where do you want to start tonight?
Well, I think before we get too far ahead of ourselves here, and Josh, you already said that term short-term rentals, but we do have some people joining us that may not exactly know what that means, short-term rental, seasonal rental, vacation rental. So if you guys want to explain, what exactly is that? What are the stipulations that come along with short-term rentals?
Well, a short-term rental, by definition for our community, is a dwelling unit that is being rented out for less than 30 days. And historically, Northwest Michigan coastal communities, they were commonly referred to as vacation rentals, and we've had numerous vacation rentals coexist in our community. But essentially, they're lodging units in our residential neighborhoods.
Yeah, I would agree. Our definition is similar. It's a dwelling unit occupied for a period less than 30 days. We use short-term rentals as an umbrella term in the city to capture any kind of dwelling or occupation less than 30 days. And we break it down into two categories then. We have vacation home rentals, which is probably what people are most familiar with, where a whole house is rented out or a whole dwelling unit is rented out without the owner being present. And then we have tourist homes. So that's where someone lives in their house and they're renting out a room, but they're present. So the home is still serving a residential purpose. They're just renting a room out. And in our community, both of those do require a license, even in the districts where they are allowed.
Mm-hmm. Yarrow, anything else you want to add about what short-term rentals mean to you?
Well, I would just add that then seasonal rentals come into place. And I guess that would be those that, are the paying non-homestead taxes, or not here living year round, but have a home that maybe isn't rented out as a short-term rental, but is vacant for much of the year.
Tonight we did ask our viewers, do you think these type of rentals have a impact, either positive or negative, on their communities and affordable housing as well? But what I want to ask you guys is, in general, do you think these rentals have an impact on our housing stock here in the region?
Absolutely, they have an impact. I think we all agree on that. Early on, they may have been perceived as more of a positive impact because a lot of the short-term rental units, they're well maintained. There are really no other issues associated with those properties. And honestly, as a community, we've had pretty minimal nuisance components associated with our short-term rentals. But as time has progressed and the cost of living has further outpaced the living wage, what we've noticed is that the short-term rental market was just consuming what used to be affordable homes in our communities and our neighborhoods. So it really, over the last decade has been more of a negative situation in many of our communities because it's forcing our middle class and our working families out of our communities.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, in our community, it's much the same historically. We've had vacation home rentals for a long time. They were few and interspersed throughout the community, and there was kind of two marked increases that we saw. One was the proliferation of the hosting platforms like Airbnb, where now anyone could easily market and book their property. And then the second uptick occurred starting in 2020. There was a huge market in this area. We in Northwest Michigan were deemed to be one of the safer spots in the state for caseloads. And you wouldn't know a pandemic was going on if you walked around downtown that summer. There were so many people here, but people's preferences were not to stay in packed hotel rooms. They wanted to be isolated into that. So that created a market that we saw a lot of homes being bought up for that purpose. It made a lot of sense to the investors at that time. So the drawback to that is, again, it was creating a more competitive market for the housing. And as Josh indicated, our wages weren't able to keep up with that housing costs. And a lot of people started getting displaced as a result.
And I know we do want to hear from Yarrow on this. We do have to go ahead and take our second commercial break. So when we come back, I know Yarrow has shared some data before on this. So maybe we can talk about the numbers when we come back from our first commercial break.
We'll be right back.
Well, welcome back to our virtual town hall tonight on affordable housing and does it impact our housing stock here, especially affordable housing in northern Michigan. And so right now we left off where we wanted to talk to Yarrow about the housing stock here, if vacation rentals and the influence of them in our communities impact our housing stock. So Yarrow, you had shared some data with me before about a month ago when we met and did an interview. So I wanted to give you the chance to share some of those numbers again.
Yeah, so our region, the 10 counties, holds about 26% of the entire state's short-term and vacation rentals. So it does have a huge impact on our year-round housing stock. And we already have a shortage of housing. We only have a 0.7% vacancy rate for housing in our region. And I think in Grand Traverse County, it's 0.4%. I can't remember Benzie off the top of my head, but given that, and then anytime a rental, a year-round rental is converted to a short-term rental or units are built that aren't for year-round housing, we do see that impact. So at Housing North, one of our policy priorities is to mitigate the impacts of short-term rentals. So really working with communities like Traverse City and Frankfort and others that are trying to create that balance and figure out where they do want short-term rentals to go. And I think Sean alluded to this, it's impacting our neighborhoods mostly where, and Sarah Van Horn mentioned this, where no longer is it that same residential feel. We have what's dark house syndrome. So we're working really hard to encourage communities to focus first on the needs for year-round housing and then where vacation rentals or short-term rentals could or should go to balance that.
Well, we're going to move on to some questions now that deal with the history of short-term rentals in our area. And honestly, I had a lot more questions for you guys about this, but a lot of you have already touched on it. Sean, you touched on, the rise of Airbnbs and Verbos and kind of like that online short-term rental sphere. And then Josh, you said as well that we've always had this history of having short-term rentals. You've had cottages and vacation rentals for families going back for decades. So, my question for you guys now is, when did you realize, that keyword that we talked about, balance? When did you realize you needed that balance between having a year-round affordable housing for your community, but also knowing that you needed some kind of lodging for tourists as well?
Josh, we can start with you.
For me personally, it was in the late 90s after I graduated college. I was going to start a family. This was even prior to me accepting the city superintendent position, but we were trying to find a home for our family, our young little family, and we wanted to stay in the community we were raised in. And we looked, and it was such a struggle even back in 1998, 1999. So for me personally, that mission started when I was hired in 2000 because I couldn't afford to live in the community I grew up in. And I certainly wanted to raise my children in this community because of the quality of life amenities that I was able to experience. I wanted them to experience that as well. But unfortunately, I had to move 12 miles out. So when I was hired as the city superintendent in 2000, that was a primary focus for me personally, just because I was living, the obstacles associated with housing, So for us, we went right into, initiating some zoning reform, with a complete override of our zoning ordinance in 2011. We adopted ancillary dwelling units. We allowed duplex units. So we were kind of ahead of the curve, trying to create more opportunities for housing. That dates back, well over 20 years ago. But as time progressed, the need certainly was enhanced and became more significant. And as John alluded, with the really significant boom of short-term rentals during COVID, people were flocking to this area of our state. And he's right; it didn't look like we had a pandemic going on. It was very busy, very bustling. But it's been an ongoing thing for us in our community, just to try to find that balance. And that's been our primary focus. Short-term rentals and vacation rentals, we kind of put on the side. We were monitoring them. We knew we needed them. We don't have enough lodging to meet the tourism demand, but our primary focus was updating our infrastructure, creating a sense of place, creating more amenities that would enhance an improved family environment. And that has been our focus for the last 20 plus years.
Right. And we do want to hear from you as well, Sean, but I think we're going to do that. We're just going to take one more commercial break here, and then we will hear from Sean for Traverse City's perspective.
And this is the last commercial break, then starting at 7 o'clock. Again, we will be on our digital platforms, Facebook, YouTube, and X, uninterrupted for the next 30 minutes, but we'll be right back in just a few minutes.
Well, welcome back to our virtual town hall. We are getting pretty close to 7 p.m. where we will go off the air and only on our digital platform. So, Sean, we will get back to you because we want you to have the full time to answer that question. So just in our last 30 seconds here, we're going to go over some of the comments we've gotten so far in relation to this question we've asked tonight.
And again, our question of the day is, do you think vacation rentals have a positive or negative impact on affordable housing in your community? An interesting comment on Facebook from Steven. He says, vacation rentals need to be taxed like hotels, and that money used to help develop attainable housing. So interesting idea there that maybe we can talk a little more about that with our panelists again on our Facebook, YouTube, and X pages in just a few minutes. But we are going to say farewell to our viewers watching on ABC. Now is a perfect time to head to your social media apps. And again, we will have 30 more minutes of this town hall without any commercial breaks. So we'll be able to dive a lot deeper into these topics. But thank you so much for watching if you are on ABC, and we will see you over on social media in just a few minutes. I'm going to put up our question of the day one more time, and then we'll be back on social media in probably about 30 seconds. All right, everyone, welcome back to our virtual town hall. We are now just virtual on Facebook, YouTube, and X. So again, no commercials. So I feel like we can really dive a lot deeper into these conversations. But let's pick up where we left off on the ABC side of things. Sean, when did you start to realize that balance was key between rental units and year-round housing in Traverse City?
I mean, that's an awareness that predates my time at the city. To be honest, they've been working on that since before I've been working here. And similar to the piece you ran with the planner in Charlevoix, I have meeting minutes from 2004 where they were talking about affordable housing then. I remember anecdotally visiting my great aunt and uncle who had just bought a house in the central neighborhood in the late 80s and being in the back seat riding home with my parents and hearing them talk about, can you believe they paid so much for that house and for what? You know, like, so high cost of living has been something that communities like ours up here have been dealing with for some time. So as I mentioned earlier, it really was kind of like the proliferation and the investment in the short-term rentals that we saw occurring that really started to raise some concerns with city staff, elected officials, and community members as a whole, you know, and we were starting to see it impact economies and businesses that weren't able to hire people. A lot of times we talked about our service industry workers. We have a big service industry. We're now seeing it impacting other aspects of people's lives too. Like we have plenty of people that we work with here on staff who, when they have to cancel dental cleaning, they have to wait 12 to 18 months because the dentist office can't hire enough hygienists because of housing. So like basic healthcare needs are being impacted by the lack of our housing. So yeah, it's been something that's been going on for quite some time. And I just want to point out, you know, short-term rentals are associated with tourism. And I'd like to acknowledge that tourism has always been a part of our economy ever since the non-native settlement happened here. We used to have wharfs in the bay, not only providing dockage for the transportation of goods, but steamships from Chicago bringing tourists up. The lumber industry went away. Sadly, our fruit production industry is starting to diminish, but the tourism has remained pretty solid through there. And I just want to add, because I think there's a perspective that needs to be embraced. We went through our master plan and we purposely did a chapter on sustainable tourism. It would be derelict of our duties to just bury our head in the sands and not talk about it, because it is a part of our economy and our identity. And when we polled the public through that, most people thought tourism made up 50 to 60% of our economy. It's really more like 26% when you combine indirect costs, you know. So it's not just tourism that's impacting all of this, you know. But my fear is when communities on sticky issues like short-term rentals, instead of trying to work with them and regulate them in a way that meets the needs of their community, when they just dig their heels in and ultimately prohibit it, that's when at times the state legislature steps in and preempts local control and says, no, you're going to allow these. You can't prohibit them. And that's not a good fit for communities like ours. So I would encourage communities to to keep having those conversations and working on identifying what is that appropriate balance. And I think in our communities, we are experiencing a time of rapid growth and development right now. And a lot of that is bringing change to the built environment that people are used to. Change brings uncertainty. And I think a lot of people are seeing this development occurring for tourism, which isn't directly impacting their everyday life. So the change is occurring and they're not really getting much of a benefit for it. You know, a lot of our multifamily structures that are being built right now are just all short-term rentals. So that's an impact that's not really matriculating down to our residents at times. Stuff like that.
Yara, is there anything you wanted to add to this question?
I don't think so. When we get to the point of solutions, I think I'll share some points about how I think we can maybe help mitigate these impacts.
Well, perfect. That's exactly where we were heading. My next question for you guys is, how do you achieve this balance that we talk about? You know, when I spoke with Josh before, he had mentioned, you know, there's an incentive that we try to do here to encourage people to have year-round housing for people who want to come here and work here in the community. So, you know, some of those achieving that balance could look like different ordinances, zoning, incentives, workforce housing. So what is it that you guys do to achieve that balance?
Yarrow, do you want to start with you?
Sorry, I'll just start in the broader picture and mention Charlevoix. We do have a deed restriction program just for year-round housing that was launched in the city of Charlevoix, and we're looking to grow and expand that to other communities. But we're working out some tweaks and learning more about the program, but it was modeled after Vail and Deed, where they have Vail and Deed program where they have a ski season in Colorado and have the same issue as we do here in just a different season. But we also, with the new housing tools that we're hoping many of our communities will embrace and adopt, using those tools does require that they be for year-round housing. So I think there are starting to be measures put in place that encourage communities to consider this and make sure that an apartment building isn't just all short-term rentals.
Yeah. Sean, what about you?
Yeah, I think one of the best steps the Traverse City has done is they have prohibited the short-term rentals from the residential neighborhoods. So that keeps them more intact. Those tend to be bigger dwelling units than, say, a condo unit. Bigger dwelling units tend to draw bigger crowds to stay there, which then tends to draw more nuisance issues. So I think by limiting to the smaller kind of multifamily units, we nip a lot of that kind of in the bud in that regard. So yeah, that's about it.
And Josh, Ali kind of already mentioned that in Frankfort, there are some incentives for year-round housing owners. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so our state legislators have heard our voices. So at the end of 2022, Governor Whitmer signed into law a series of legislation that would allow some tax incentive opportunities. And we, as a community, were able to take advantage of that. So in 2023, we adopted an attainable housing district, which is our entire M22 and Main Street corridor. This will allow a private property owner that is going to provide rental housing to our workforce. They have to fall within the 60% to 120% of the AMI. They have to charge rent that's based on a table that's provided by MISHDA based on those guidelines. They have to do an initial $5,000 investment on the property, but if they fulfill all of that criteria, they are eligible for up to a 50% tax break for 12 years, for up to 12 years. You know, that's kind of really close to the equivalent of a non-homestead. And, you know, and Jarl can attest to this. That was really what we were trying to push is anyone that's creating rental housing for our workforce or people that fall within that income category, you know, let's give them a homestead exemption. And Lansing didn't really see it that way, but they were able to create some other opportunities. So we were able to take advantage of that. So that's another tool in our toolbox. And I mentioned earlier, we did a significant focus on zoning reform. And a lot of that dates back to 2011, where we increased our building heights, created more mixed use opportunity, allowed duplex units in all of our residential districts, and then permitted ADUs. And our goal with the ADUs was we saw a continuing shift, you know, helping our aging parents, having them close to us, but also our adult children in trying to coexist and be able to afford and live in paradise. You know, so we were really hopeful that this was going to create some opportunities, and they have for us. But you know, again, you know, putting a lot of focus in creating this balance. In 2018, we started the process to create a housing commission. We finalized that in 2019, and that we continued with that work by adopting a nonprofit community land trust. And we felt that putting those tools in place and those groups in place is going to allow us to be in a better position to take advantage of any other grant opportunities that may exist, collaborate with our community partners. Our community has been amazing. It's been a lot of fun the last 5 years because through the due diligence and hard work of our housing commission and our land trust, we have 12 new apartments that are affordable. We have 4 new homes that are sold and being bought. And those homes, because of the land trust model, they will remain affordable homes in perpetuity because we essentially put a deed restriction on the property. The land is owned by the land trust. So the homeowner is able to gain equity in the home, but at a point where they need to sell or upgrade, you know, the property remains with the land trust. So it becomes available to another family that falls within that category. So, you know, as a community, we've laid the foundational elements to allow us to be more successful. But, you know, getting the community involved, you know, when you start having these conversations at the local restaurant or at the coffee shop, and you start talking about, you know, especially our retirees, they've come to expect a certain amount of quality of life. And they're starting to realize that that's being impacted with our inability to create housing for our workforce. Their favorite restaurant's not open every day. I mean, we all deal with this in our day-to-day lives. But when we start, you know, you're creating these conversations, some of these folks have an aha moment and they get involved. And we've been successful in creating some funding opportunities that allowed our projects to be affordable. So, I mean, our mission is far from done. We're continuing to move forward and create more opportunity. I have the privilege of serving on the board of directors at Housing North, so I get to work with Jarl. We get to go down and talk to our legislators and really stay focused on really telling the story of what our needs are as a community. And that's going to expand into, you know, what we need to do as a region, as a community to enhance skilled trades opportunities for our youth and how we do a better job at delivering that and creating those opportunities because, you know, there's also a supply and demand component. I mean, the cost of construction right now is pushing $500 a square foot for certain development, but the average is around $300 a square foot. You know, and that just further creates obstacles for our working families. So, you know, expanding the workforce in that segment will certainly reduce some of the costs over time. And the short-term rental, you know, as I mentioned earlier, we kind of set it all on the side. We need them, but we need to control them. So in 2018, we created a task force that focused on short-term rentals. You know, while we had another group working on workforce housing, we were working in synergy and unison. A lot of political pushback for the short-term rental. We had an ordinance crafted. We were ready to adopt it. Had a lot of pushback. So we slowed down a little bit and went a different route in 2018 where we did a good neighbor guide that we made available and a registration. And that kind of allowed us also to get a better sense of how many we had. And, but again, you know, after the pandemic, we needed to do, it became very evident we needed to immediately do something. And that's where we came in and adopt our short-term rental ordinance. But beyond that, we adopted we call it our attainable housing ordinance, Article 8. You can build 600 square foot cottages on a 5,000 square foot lot in the city of Frankfort if it's available for workforce housing. You can do a quadplex with an ADU. You know, so we went deep with zoning reform to create some opportunity, and we're looking at some other partnerships to make those projects become a reality. But right now, it's our land trust taking the lead with that in our housing commission. And a nonprofit developer, Homestretch, you probably heard about them if you reported about them. They were the developer of our 12-unit project. This is zero taxes are created. That the city gave a 0% PILT to this project. The city donated the land. Benzie County, through their ARPA funding, gave $500,000 towards the project. Michigan gave us a $600,000 missing middle. We had over $1.2 million in grant subsidy plus donated land. And that's what made it affordable. So that's the reality we're living in with constructing these units is it's more than just building them. It's creating some very unique partnerships, and essentially you got to subsidize them to the tune of about $100,000 to $150,000 a unit. And you know, Yarrow and I are hammering our legislators to create some opportunity to have them really look at this in a big picture standpoint, because if we could do a better job at creating housing opportunities, our people are going to do better. They're going to work harder. They're going to have income tax created. There's just the quality of life is just going to, you know, significantly improve for all. So, you know, like Sean stated earlier, I could talk about this all day long, but I feel great where we're at as a community, but we're nowhere near where we need to be. I mean, our housing shortfalls, we'll be chasing housing in perpetuity, you know, for an eternity. But we're doing an amazing job. What Yarrow's doing with Housing North is a testament to the dedication of this region. And I know Lansing, the state of Michigan, is looking at this Northwest region, you know, as we, I feel we're taking the lead with it in creating a lot of opportunities, especially for our rural communities. So, I mean, I applaud what's going on in our communities, and there's been so much amazing synergy created that we're going to get through this. It's going to continue to take time and diligence, and we need funding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I have to agree. I mean, first I want to commend Josh, his appointed and elected boards, his community, because in our region, they really have been leaders. For a small community, they are mighty on the housing ecosystem reform. The first time I met Josh was at a roundtable with Traverse Connect, and he actually had to leave to go to his council meeting. And he said they were voting on all this zoning reform. And when he told us what it was, I was there with the planning commission chair and another planning commissioner who sits on the city commission. And we all looked at each other like, well, that's what we're proposing right now. And they're already voting on it. And we're like, Josh, how did you get to that point? He's like, the pain got that bad for the community. So it would be nice if we could address these needs of our community without getting to that point of suffering, you know, and we can be honest and diligent about what needs to change. Because Yarrow has a great analogy that, you know, there's many levers to the housing ecosystem, and everything that we do is manipulating one lever. You know, there's no panacea here. The work is never done. It always takes work, input, effort, and things like that. Josh mentioned a good thing too. You know, there's a scenario through our tax law where, you know, if I own a dwelling unit and I'm not living in it, I'm going to pay about 40% more in taxes. And I can rent it long-term for what the market can bear, or short-term and get a lot more overhead. It's like we're almost incentivizing people to operate on the short-term rental by penalizing through taxation the fact that it is a rental and not an owner-occupied house, which is unfortunate because when you look across the nation, like people are renting more and more, and for different reasons than maybe 50 years ago. You know, the whole stigma with what a renter was as a transient individual it's just not the reality anymore. So I think some of those laws need to evolve to meet that need. Now, Josh is right. The state is not very keen on getting rid of that homestead exemption, but they have put some other tools in place. We have not implemented as many of them here as Frankfurt has. Again, you know, just again commending that community on their successes. But that's just a matter of, it's not a lack of will. We just have a lot of priorities, a lot of irons in the fire right now, and so we're trying to just get through the list of all the stuff that we're trying to accomplish here.
Well, you guys set this up perfectly for what my next question was going to be. And my next question was, do you guys talk to each other about this? And all of you actually said different moments in time where you've spoken to each other. But, you know, for someone who is tuning in to this town hall tonight and they see, oh, okay, well, I hear Frankfurt, I hear City of Traverse City. Well, what about my community? You know, a way that I had opened my story was the city of Manistee was talking about a potential short-term rental ordinance. And they said, wait, I like what Frankfurt's doing. And then when I told Josh this, he says, well, that's funny because we actually copied a lot of that from Sutton's Bay and Bingham Township. So how do you guys talk to these other communities across northern Michigan about, hey, what are you doing?
Sometimes we just pick up the phone and be like, hey, I saw you talking to Ellie Baxter on the news. I have a question about what you're doing. So, I mean, but we also, you know, Yarrow through the Housing Summit creates these opportunities. I know, Josh, I think you were down at the planning conference this year. You know, we talked there. Those state organizations help foster those opportunities. Even locally, Networks Northwest has opportunities for the planners to get together. And here in our county, we got rid of county planning a number of years ago, but now we're trying to bring back our quarterly planner luncheon so we can have more of these conversations. And it's funny, now that I think of it, I remember the first one I went to 8 years ago was on the topic of short-term rentals. And so, here we are still having that conversation because it's not going away. The market's evolving, and therefore we need to evolve to make sure it's still serving our communities.
Oh, there's collaboration that goes on constantly. Like Sean said, the majority of that, just pick up the phone. And I mean, there's times where I will go on somebody's website, check out, I'm like, oh, this is an awesome ordinance. And we'll share it with our planning commission, our city council, and our team. I have conversations like with the Boyne city manager. They brought, their mayor and their planner and a group of members. They came down and we met. And government, we feed off of what other communities are doing, and we try to figure out what works and what doesn't, and what would work better for our environment. So that collaboration is really intense and positive. And, again, Sean mentioned the housing summit. Yarl did, and her team did an amazing job. And it's such a powerful opportunity for community. And I encourage anyone that's elected or appointed, at a planning commission level, city council, city commission level, to attend our housing summit, because the level of energy that the synergy that's created on that. I mean, I attend these and I'm well versed in what's going on, but the energy and the reboot that I get just talking to other people and learning what their struggles are and what their successes are just allows us to come back to our community and just continue to do a better job. And you got to be flexible, you got to be open-minded. We got a long ways to go, but we've laid the foundation, and for that, I'm very proud of what we've been able to do as a region.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree. I mean, to me, I think a resilient community is one where people have the opportunity to thrive regardless of background, income, education, and that takes work. To make sure that those opportunities still exist for people, whether it's housing, business opportunities, entrepreneurship, and things like that. So, that's just one of the things that we're constantly working on. Why we do this work is because we want our communities to be a place for everyone. It's not a good story when you hear of someone saying, hey, I had to take my kids out of their school because we had to move 30 miles away because that's the only housing we can find. Like, that's a disruption to people's lives that's going to hinder them from thriving. Josh hit on this earlier too. I used to be an educator, so a lot of childhood development psychology, but there's that Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And at the bottom is like your security and your safety, your housing, your basic needs met. If you can't meet those needs, you can't expect that person to thrive beyond that next level, because you have to have that foundational security in your life. And that's, again, what we're trying to make sure exists in our communities.
And Yara, what about you? Because I know you're in a pretty unique role where you're literally representing 10 counties right off the bat. So we know you're having those conversations.
Yeah, I would just add that each of our communities has some sort of housing advocacy or collective that gets together too, monthly or quarterly. And I think that's also a conduit to share information and exchange new ideas. And then we are now the regional lead for our statewide housing partnership, and there is a regional plan for our 10 counties. So people can get involved there and learn more, but that's also a way that we share out updates and information and highlights from the state and other communities to those housing advocates, developers, and partners. And a lot of that information that we've mentioned tonight is all on our website. So feel free to check those out if you want to learn more. But if there are housing advocates out there who want to learn more, we can always direct you. And then really, we're just always sharing new zoning codes or working with our partners at Michigan Association of Planning to figure out what are those best practices, around housing that we can share with each of our 10 counties.
Now, each of you have mentioned tonight that you have been involved or attended, a conference or had these conversations at the state level about, hey, what do we do potentially about short-term rentals? Is there concern? I know I have talked to each of you about this. Is there concern about a statewide regulation?
Yeah, or a statewide prohibition on regulation is probably what we're more afraid of. You know, I think communities, I'm sorry, Traverse City is not the same as like, say, Mayo. Like they're very different communities, and therefore their regulations on these issues will probably need to be tailored to their community. So we typically, on the issue of short-term rentals, would not like to see the state take that away. But that's going to take everyone playing well in the sandbox together to to make sure that the parents don't take the toys away from us. So we have that behooves us as communities to be responsible with that authority that we have and make sure that we're doing that.
Yeah, I echo what Sean is saying. That, you know, the state of Michigan's been a really great partner in a lot of endeavors, but you know, our local units of government should have the responsibility of determining how we zone our communities. And it's an interesting dynamic when the state comes in and is telling. I mean, really, if you were to dissect any zoning ordinance, the way it's written, short-term rentals are a complete violation of that. But as a community, we kind of looked the other way for so long that we made it more of a legal non-conforming use within our residential districts. Which you know, again, we have a police power short-term rental ordinance, which is not a zoning ordinance. You know, so it gives us a little bit more of an enforcement component. That's the direction we went as a community. But yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with Sean. The state really needs to stay in their lane. You know, I mean, I don't want to come out and be that bold, but I feel we know our communities better than the legislators. But you know, giving us resources and tools, you know, that's the amazing synergy and partnership we got to have with the state.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I was just going to add. I think the bills that we're watching or hopeful for would provide a funding mechanism that would allow short-term rentals to like I think the commenter or question was, to maybe fund some housing funds or attainable housing projects. So I think looking at ways that can happen and that Treasury would allow that, where it would make sense that revenue would go back to those local units of government where those short-term rentals were, and actually benefit economic development in those communities. So those are the kind of things we're watching at Housing North, but we do believe that local control is best, and really understanding the housing stock and making those decisions locally is important, but making sure there's enough year-round housing first.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think to the question or comment that you read from online earlier about taxing them, I think it's worth noting that we don't have the authority to do that at the local level. That would need to be granted to us from the state. And right now, the only lodging tax that can be levied goes directly to the CVB, the Convention and Visitors Bureau, or in our case, TC Tourism, which then uses it to promote the area more. Now, I'm not taking a slight on TC Tourism, but the state has not given us a tool where we can use some sort of tax revenue that's collected to help us pay for our infrastructure that, you know, gets heavily used in our summer months, now expanding into the shoulder months too of heavy usage. And, you know, many states throughout the country do allow that to help cities shoulder that infrastructure burden without putting it all on their residential taxpayers, you know. And so those are some of those tools and opportunities where we at the local units of government can work with our state legislatures to find meaningful solutions that help balance all this.
Yeah, so we charge a $500 license fee a year for our short-term rental units, and we're capped at 120 as a community. We allow short-term rental operations in our commercial corridors, which is along Main Street and our waterfront. That's where we encourage those activities to occur. That's where they're properly zoned. But with this revenue generated from the license fee, we have to be careful how we use that. I mean, ideally, you would love to use any excess revenue and shift it right towards workforce housing and help us with planning efforts, with infrastructure, with subsidizing rent assistance, whatever the case may be. I mean, that was our ultimate, initial desire to utilize that revenue. But you can't. It's a fee, so you have to use that source of revenue to facilitate the short-term rental operations. So we're always going to have a little bit of a surplus in there, unless we were able to shift the use of those dollars, and probably more than likely that'll evolve into probably a reduce rate after the initial, just because of the amount of inspecting and things that go into a short-term rental up front. But those are some of the things that we're trying to figure out too. With, you know, it would be so cool to take the STR revenue and shift it right into housing, but fundamentally we can't really do that.
Correct.
Or at least it would be frowned upon. It would be frowned upon.
So
our attorney would say, yeah.
If I can, real quick on the topic, because you talk about how we, you know, discuss things amongst ourselves and at state level and stuff like that. So there has been a long ongoing debate about short-term rentals and housing, you know, and most people, planners like myself, are like, well, we need to probably take a look at regulating this so that our housing stock is not going to be consumed. There's another side of that argument that my colleagues also have, some of them, that, hey, at least it's getting the housing built and it's online, ready to go housing. And at some point, the market is going to become saturated and correct itself, and the housing is going to be existing. I didn't always buy into that argument personally, but I'm starting to see it in our town now. And we're hearing from realtors and short-term rental property managers that, at least in our town, our short-term rental market is tanking. It's crashing, and they're being sold off and things like that. What the overall outcome is going to be, we're going to have to wait and see, you know, because I have spoken with people personally that live in these units that are primarily short-term rentals, and it's not a great experience for them, right? They never know who their neighbors are. It's coming and going. People are living there or staying there for different purposes, and the people that are living there, you know, all that kind of stuff. So we'll kind of see how that starts to work out, but we're seeing that shift starting to occur for the first time, where it had been nothing but converting long-term housing to short-term. Now we're starting to see short-term get converted back to long-term on a very small scale. So it's piqued our interest, and we'll see where that goes. But I also learned from a short-term rental property manager that, you know, since we keep it out of our residential neighborhoods or single-family homes, most of this is occurring in multifamily buildings. Well, unlike a hotel where all the units are managed by one individual entity, you have every unit owned and managed by someone else. So if someone is going to try to stay in that building, you want them to stay in your unit. So everyone's undercutting each other to where it just doesn't financially make sense anymore, because they want to get the bookings in their unit, not their neighbor's unit, because they're not all working together, because it's not one business, it's 40 different businesses operating in competition in the same structure. And so almost by design, they're cannibalizing each other in the market.
Well, I know this is a topic that you guys could talk about probably for the rest of the night, but unfortunately we are running out of time, and we probably only really reached the tip of the iceberg. But I do want to circle back to our question of the day and take a look at the live results. So I think I can pull it up and still show. Okay, yep, there we are. So again, our question is, do you think vacation rentals have a positive or negative impact on affordable housing in your community? 85% voted negative, 15% voted positive. I'm curious what your reaction and response to these results are. So, Yara, what do you think about these results?
I'm not that surprised. I think this is, you know, what I have been seeing. I guess I expected it to be maybe a few more people on the negative side, but I think this is, you know, there is a need for short-term rentals, and they don't always have a negative impact. But I think, to Sean's point, you know, the market is getting better, and I think in some ways it could balance itself out. But I'm not that surprised, and I think it's just important to keep the conversation going in these communities.
Yeah. What about you, Josh?
I'm not surprised at all either, and I agree with Yarrow. I thought it would be a little bit on the higher side, and you know, maybe this poll would be a little different 10 years ago, maybe a little bit more closer to 50-50. But yeah, I think people, you know, post-pandemic, it's families are struggling. A lot of people are working multiple jobs, and you know, we live in paradise. It is an amazing place to raise a family, and we have excellent medical opportunities. Our schools are amazing, you know, so we have a strong foundation for our communities to attract families. So you know, I'm thankful that a lot of the short-term rental units in our community are owned by folks that eventually want to retire here, you know, so there is an end with a lot of the short-term rentals that we have. There are a few that are they're just strictly businesses, you know, that the people that own them never spend a night in them. But again, the majority of them are people that love the community. They want to be a part of the community. For them to be able to afford the community or earn a little bit of an income while they're not here, they go the short-term rental route. And we saw our short-term rental cap from 120. This year we had 113 licenses issued, so we're seeing a reduction as well. I'm going to monitor that closely just to make sure, you know, everything is going in accordance to the ordinance. But yeah, I think people have gotten to the point where we really need to shift our focus in doing a better job at creating opportunities for our families and the people that we depend on for the quality of life and why we live here.
Sean, what are your thoughts on our results?
Yeah, same. Not surprised by this at all. You know, maybe surprised that 15% is positive. That's that high at this point. You know, I think the sentiment would be different if this, you know, rapid proliferation of short-term rentals was matched by a proportional proliferation of attainable housing for our residents. You know, but that's not what's happening right now. And in fact, the imbalance is causing housing to be even more unattainable for them. But there is a place for them. We do have a market demand. We do have a sector of the economy that depends on tourism, and sometimes it helps the pro forma work out to provide affordable housing. Across the street from me is a unique mixed-use building, real estate cooperative, where they have a number of dwelling units that are workforce, or I'm sorry, low income housing, you know, so they're, you know, 80% AMI. They're able to do that because they have another handful of units that they use as a short-term rental. So the short-term rentals in the building are subsidizing the affordable housing in the building. And then they also have a mix that's just market rate. So that's kind of nice in itself too, because you have a diversity of income levels in a house. You're not taking all low income and putting them right here and all high income and putting them right here. It really is more a reflection of community in a way. So they can be leveraged for good, I guess, is my point. But we got to always make sure we keep these things in balance. Like Josh said, I'm surprised to hear they haven't hit their cap of 120, but we know in this line of work that we're not going to rest on our laurels and become comfortable with those numbers, because next year could be completely different. So we got to just always be monitoring and be involved.
All right. Well, guys, we are out of time. So I just want to thank you all so much for joining us on our virtual town hall and touching on this topic that it does impact each community maybe a little differently, but we all know it is an issue all across northern Michigan. But it was really interesting to hear each of your different perspectives on how to address this and how to move forward and, of course, create that balance. And thanks to all of our viewers so much for joining us on our virtual town hall. And anything else that you want to mention before we go, Allie?
Yeah, just if you joined us a little bit later and you wanted to see our full conversation with Sean, Josh, and Yarrow, this will be posted later on our YouTube page, and you can also watch the live video back as well.
So thanks, guys, again so much for joining us on our town hall. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yep.